Well, welcome to Thursday evening devotionals from the kitchen table, where we've been talking about women of the Bible. You know, the women of the Bible, most of them aren't the main characters in any of the stories. Some of them are, but most of them are not. And yet, without the women of the Bible, the main characters of a story could never have done what they did. They couldn't have completed their mission or their ministry that the Lord had given them. And the same way with us. Had those women of the Bible not have done what they did, we wouldn't have the faith that we have today either. We might know something altogether different as well. But these women had great faith. And their faith then was relayed to their children, or to the people that they served. I just was thinking, I just looked out the patio window over there. You know, I still have flowers, even though it's getting cooler. I'm told that it's gonna maybe have some frost here in the next few days as well. And I'm thinking, oh, I'm not ready for this. Who is? But then on the other hand, that's why I stay in Ohio. I don't like going to other parts of the country. I've been there before, and I just like the four seasons. I like this cycle over and over again. When winter comes here and it gets so cold, you think, oh, I just can't make it another day through this cold. And then what happens? God then sends springtime to us, doesn't He? And even in the cold days of winter, He warms our hearts, and He gives us something to be thankful for each and every day. But as springtime comes then, and all the plants begin sending their shoots through the ground up toward the skies, new life begins, and it's just a continuous cycle. And I just love this cycle. I don't like all the days, you know, the extreme hot, extreme colds. But no matter how bad it gets, I know that God is with us. God is with us. Well, as we continue our study of women of the Bible, the person we're talking about tonight, more than likely you aren't familiar with their name. But let me just share with you here. I hope you can see that name all right. I hope it comes through on the camera. The top name is Jochebed. Okay, it's a great woman of faith in the Bible. And down below then the name is Amram, and it's her husband, and we'll talk more about that in a moment, but I just wanted you to see that. Sometimes when I spell it, it doesn't come out so well, but if you can see it, it makes it easier to understand. Well, Jochebed is the woman's name that we'll be looking at tonight. Her name implies that Jehovah God is my glory. Well, Jehovah God is our glory as well, isn't it? But it certainly was her glory, and she was a great woman of faith, as I said a moment ago, and as I said also, it's a name that probably is not familiar to you, but you will recognize her children's name. She was a Hebrew woman, by the way, and again, a great believer in Jehovah God. Her story can be found, mostly, it's in Exodus chapter 2, verses 1 through 11, and then again in chapter 6, verse 20, in Numbers, chapter 26, verse 59, and Hebrews, chapter 11, verse 20. There, she just mentioned in a verse there, but it helps you understand her story just a little bit better. Jochebed was a daughter of Levi, who married a man of the house of Levi, whose name was Amram. She married her nephew, her brother's son. Amram was both her husband and her nephew. Now, today in our culture, we would look at that and in shock, wouldn't we? That just doesn't happen in our culture today. In fact, it's prohibited by law. But in their day, there was no law against such thing, and those kind of marriages happened frequently until the Lord gave Moses the law. So, as I said, it just wouldn't happen in our culture today. No way. It would be a forbidden taboo. And as I said, most of us aren't familiar with Jochebed's name, but we certainly are familiar with her children's names. They're very familiar to us. Amram and Jochebed had 3 children. Their names, the oldest and the first was Miriam, who was a gifted poet and musician. Her second child and oldest son, who was his name is Aaron, and he became Israel's first great high priest. And the youngest son then, and perhaps the most familiar, he's known by many different people of the world. His name is Moses, who was the great lawgiver that the Lord gave his law to, and one of the greatest national leaders that the world has ever known. The Israelites, let me just set the stage for you so you can hopefully see the context of her faith. The Israelites had been living in Egypt for quite some time as this story unfolds. Jacob's son, you may remember, Joseph, was sold by his brothers because Joseph was the youngest and his older brothers were jealous of him. So they sold him to some merchants who were on their way to Egypt. And when Joseph arrived in Egypt after some years of living there, Joseph then won the king's favor. And he rose high in the ranks so that he became second only in all of Egypt, second only to Pharaoh. And while he was there, famine came upon the land of Israel, or the land of Palestine. And Jacob, his father, and all of his brothers then packed up their belongings. They headed to Egypt to avoid the famine that was in Israel. And then when they arrived in Egypt, Joseph then gave them food and clothing and shelter, and he helped them prosper. And prosper they did. They became very numerous. They almost outnumbered the Egyptian people. Well, as time went on, Jacob and then Joseph and all of Joseph's siblings, then they all died. And then Pharaoh died, the king that whom Joseph had favor with. He died as well. Another king was crowned and anointed. And this king didn't know Joseph, didn't care about Joseph. And he didn't like the Hebrews either, because they were outnumbering, or almost outnumbering, the Egyptians. And so he laid down a harsh, very cruel, harsh order that any Hebrew male child that was born was to be thrown into the Nile River and killed. Any female could live, but any male child had to be killed. And then, of course, then they took all of their possessions because they didn't like the Hebrews, and they put them into involuntary servitude, and they worked them from daylight to dark. And they were harsh taskmasters as well with the Hebrews. They made their life miserable. It was a terrible living. And so it's in this circumstance then that Jochebed is pregnant with child when this order comes down that all children are to be cast into the Nile River and killed. That is, all newborn male children. Now Jochebed's oldest, Miriam, was about 10 years old at the time. Aaron was about 7. They had been here for a while, so the king's decree didn't really apply to them, but only to this newborn infant that Jochebed had been carrying. Can you envision the stress that Jochebed must have had being pregnant with child, wondering, what is it going to be, a boy or a girl? Is it going to be a boy infant who will be ripped out of her arms and cast into the Nile River and killed, perhaps eaten by the crocodiles? Or will it be a girl who will be able to live, but her life will be very harsh because she will be born into slavery, even though she'll be allowed to live? Well, it turned out it was a boy. This newborn babe was a boy, and she was able to hide him for 3 months and to take care of him. How she managed to mask or cover his cries, I don't know. We're not told that, other than she hid him for about 3 months, and then she knew it was time to give him up. The Lord had spoken to her heart. And so she made a basket out of reeds and put pitch and tar around it so that it would be waterproof. And then she placed the baby inside and set it adrift into the Nile River and let it float among the reeds. Now, as it was going down the river, Miriam, his older sister then, followed that basket and watched where it went. And a woman and her escort came to the Nile River. This woman came to the river to bathe. Now, I don't know how that river was in that day, but I'll tell you, the last time I saw the Nile River, it was very, very dirty. I wouldn't even stick my big toe into that river. As we drove by, it was very common to see cows and other kinds of animals just laying in the river, just decomposing. It was an awful sight, and it was just filthy. But we're told that she was going to the Nile River to bathe. Perhaps it was a lot cleaner then when they didn't have the pollutants that we have today in our world. And it turns out this woman was Pharaoh's daughter, the very man who ordered the death of all newborn Hebrew male infants. And she saw this basket out there, and she had her servant to go out and retrieve that basket. And when she opened up the basket, she looked inside and saw this male newborn child laying inside this basket. And she knew it was a Hebrew. And yet she disobeyed her father's orders and did not kill the child. Instead, she as well hid the child and saw to it that it was raised. And when Pharaoh's daughter was looking at the baby, Miriam ran up to her and said, "You want me to go find somebody to nurse that baby for you?" And Pharaoh's daughter said, "Yeah, go find somebody to nurse the child for me." So Miriam ran straight to her mother, Jochebed, and told her mother that Pharaoh's daughter was looking for someone to nurse the baby, to come and she could nurse the baby. And so Jochebed went, and Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Listen, I want you to nurse this child, I want you to care for this child, and I'll see to it that you receive wages for caring for this child." Imagine that, being paid for raising your own child. Now, of course, as I said earlier, there's much, much more to this story. But I'm going to leave it go for right now. But I just want you to see what happened because of Jochebed's faith. Now, what happens in our life may not turn out to be what happened in Jochebed's life. We're each different. Our circumstances are differently. And incidentally, the king's daughter named this infant Moses. Moses. She named him Moses because she said, I drew him out of the water, which is what Moses means. I drew him out of the water. Well, you can see the hand of God when you hear these things. The baby was supposed to have been thrown into the Nile River and killed. It was indeed placed into the Nile River, but it lived. It lived. It was raised up by the very daughter of the man who ordered this baby's death. And she claimed this baby as her own son. And this baby's own mother then was able to nurture and raise and care for this child, for Moses. And she was paid to care for this child from the royal treasury, from the treasury of the very man who had ordered his death. Who else could make such a thing happen than the Lord? The Lord looks after those who put their faith and trust in Him, no matter what circumstances that they're dealing with. When we're down in the dark valley or going through the tunnels in the dark places of life, the sun's still shining even though we can't see it. And in our dark places, God is still there. Even sometimes we may wonder where He's at. God is still there, and He's still looking after us and caring for us. We're just simply told to keep the faith as Jochebed kept the faith. The author of Hebrews chapter 11 verse 6 tells us that without faith, it is impossible to please God. So my prayer for you this week is that God will help you strengthen your faith, and that you just draw just a little closer to Him. Have a great and blessed week.